Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Let's try to keep on schedule, so we'll start the party, so to speak. My name is Asaf Romirowsky. I am the executive director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East. We're the ones responsible for putting on this panel this morning. To my left is Donna Devine, who is a member of SPME. She's also a Morningstar Family Professor of Jewish Studies and Professor of Government Emerita at Smith College, where she taught Middle East for many, many years. To Donna's left is Cary Nelson, who is the Jubilee Professor of Arts and Sciences Emeritus at University of Illinois, Urbana. He's an affiliate member of University of Haifa. He's the author and editor of more than 30 books. The book you have over here that kindly Cary brought to us all the way from Illinois is entitled Israel Denial, Anti-Zionism, Anti-Semitism, the Faculty Campaign Against the Jewish State. And he's authored over 300 articles on many topics, and now diving into a lot of these issues. This morning's panel, as some of you are aware, is a follow-up to a journal that we published, that we were part of, Donna and I, and Miriam was in the audience, of the Journal of Israel Studies that we entitled Word Crimes. Cary, who's been a friend and an observer of the same issues that we tackled some in these in the journal itself, has been a great observer of some of the problems we've addressed. But before we go into the reactions, I just kind of want to explain what we did and what the intention was with this academic experiment, so to speak, and the reactions that we've received as a result of that. Interestingly enough, we actually presented at ASMEA here over a year ago, I would say, last year. Before the journal was even out, we spoke about the project, and there was a great deal of excitement for the concept that we tried to come up with. The idea was, by the title of the journal itself, Word Crimes, we chose phrases, we chose terms that we believed would need to be unpacked as a result of how intense they are, how sometimes toxic they get, as a way to unpack how they are used when describing the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic and the Arab-Israeli conflict at large. And the initial reactions were very positive, trying to, again, we all believe as social scientists that lexicon is very important, trying to understand the richness of what the phraseology means. So we got a great deal of interest by members here. We presented at, before we presented here, we presented at the Association of Israel Studies in Berkeley, California. Also a great deal of interest. But when the actual journal came out, the reactions were quite the opposite of what we expected. We have been attacked. In particular, all of us, but in particular my friend Donna, who has served at the time as the president of the Association of Israel Studies. It was fascinating to us as academics what, the source of this nerve that we hit in the state of Israel studies today and in the state of, I would say, Middle East studies at large. It's interesting to me, as I come out of Middle East studies myself. ASMEA, this association itself, was created exactly for many of the reasons, the reactions that we have received, to counter the dogmatic nature of MESA, which is the Middle East Studies Association of America, which many of us who have gone to felt that there was no longer allowing for discourse and discussion on the issues that we wanted to talk about. So when ASMEA came about, we have seen a great deal, we're here, of ability to discuss, I would say, a more honest and a more richer conversation on some of these conversations and topics that were not finding a forum at the Middle East Studies Association. So, when you look at what we did with this word crimes experiment, I think it represents a larger microcosm of the lack of balance. I think we're in an age today where the reactions were, which we'll dive into a little bit, in the panel itself. There was a petition against us. There was an attempt to question our scholarship. We were perceived as propagandists. We were perceived as Hasbara individuals, as if we don't have any kind of scholarship or weight or to say about these topics, and all because the conclusion of many of the contributors who unpacked these terms came out on the side of a pro-Zionist side, or was perceived, to be only, a one-sided narrative. One of the accusations against us that we were a mouthpiece for the Netanyahu government. A variety of
well, that's true, of course. But
yeah,
it's okay.
Yeah, of course, So a flurry of blessings and that got into that. What I find interesting, and I think that this is part of the environment that we're in today, we are in this environment, or political, cultural environment of a cancel culture that you find in America today. And I think that part of the reactions that because we challenge the dogmatic nature of the day vis-a-vis how the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic is discussed on a variety of North American campuses, but even in Israel, that this was kind of the reactions towards us and towards the editors at large and towards the publication of what is being said here. And instead of, which I think is more concerning at large about the state of this conduct, instead of engaging in actual academic discourse where you would write a response, a rejoinder, covering a real conversation, a real academic debate, the responses were, let's use social media, let's leak it to Haaretz. And so many of the people who were reading or were trying to understand the controversy as it came out to be, and this has been going on for the past few months now, we're all relying on a variety of social media outlets, Haaretz pieces and others, without actually understanding what took place. There's, and if you look at the people who petitioned against us, they were the same individuals who were petitioning against, if you compare the names, against a recent statement by the German Bundestag, the fact that anti-Semitism is, that BDS is not anti-Semitic. And so because, within the space that we're in, and we have been working, all of us here, I would say, within tackling the environment as it relates to the boycott movement and what it means to the conversation as it relates to the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic, and the fact that BDS allows for no room when it comes to the conversation on these matters, but presents a black and white narrative on the topic at large. I think that we, even though, the ironic part that while we try to unpack these terms for the sake of giving academics, individuals, knowledge of how to tackle these topics, from intersectionality to pinkwashing to indigeneity, terms that are that have a lot of weight, but have this connotation of encompassing the entire conflict in one word or one phrase. We ourselves were victims, I would say, of this kind of academic cancel culture by trying to poo-poo or put aside the things that we have discussed at large. And I think that there's no doubt that that there's no state that it's above criticism, and we're all for a healthy and debate about these issues. But the way that this was shut down by some members of the Association of Israel Studies, because it challenged the orthodoxy that they have to deal with on their own respective campuses, or how they have to explain this, I think is quite telling at large. It's interesting beyond that, in particular, I, for example, the chapter that I wrote dealt with unpacking the Arab-Palestinian refugee issue. And it's a topic that I've devoted 20 years of my time in research to dealing with. I wrote a book on this topic. The criticisms against me personally were about the fact that it didn't have, it didn't include more sources, even though I cited, all primary sources, the United Nations, but that was not enough for the opposition. But it is telling, and I have actually looked, in particular on this topic as the topic of refugees within academia. If you look within the larger understanding of how the right of return Arab-Palestinian refugees are explained within members of MESA and people who teach Middle East studies out of this out of this view, it has been exactly the kind of BDS narrative that we see all around. The connotation has been right of return, and then there's, again, the use of ethnic cleansing as a result of how that's used. We've seen a variety of individuals who've advocated for this in their classrooms. Individuals, for example, like Joseph Massad, who is a professor at Columbia, and I quote here, he writes that the Palestinian diaspora and the refugees to sacrifice their rights to ask for diaspora refugees more generally to commit national suicide. These are the kind of language that was used there. People like Khatam Bazian, who heads the Islamophobia Center at UC Berkeley and is the same individual who has called for an intifada in America. He openly advocates for a right of return, exactly because of what it means to the state of Israel. So, there is, because these terms have exactly political implications on this narrative, and these are the more extreme ones on the hard Palestinian, the Arab-Palestinian narrative that is being taught within academia, but there has been a trickle-down effect, I would say, into the area of Israel studies, which again, should be an area where we have all sides of the conflict as it relates to Israel studies, left, right, center, but this was not the reaction that this was not really the what we saw in this entire academic experiment. I would also say that part of the reason that we published this, I think, that, me as part of SPME in particular, was to give individuals in our membership, academics, we're seeking ways to tackle these topics and these issues in academic scholarly ways. So we thought it would be a great tool to give to individuals to be able to cite and address these topics, which we thought was a useful tool when you're trying to dissect the region, and we thought it would be a great, useful academic tool, something that I think we all aspire to. I actually gave a talk about this week at Franklin and Marshall, where our book was actually cited and given part of the syllabi. I'm not sure how much it's happening across the board, but that was indeed the intention. To that end, all of us, have positively, I would say, the journal is now in its second printing or third printing already. What? Okay. It's been read. Okay, good. And so it's selling like hotcakes. We're not making any money off of this. Right, exactly. We should be making a lot of money off of it. But we're not. But that was not the point. We were trying, but out of the result of the interest and the reaction that was given and the attention that was given to the journal itself, which we're happy about, but it does, I think, speak to volumes to the state of what we're facing today in this era of cancel culture and this era of what is allowed to be discussed. The other part, which I think is obviously implied by this, but we do find, and I think my personal observations of the people that I've spoken to and people have spoken to me as a result of this journal itself, is the political toxicity that's involved in this. The perception is on many North American college campuses is that if you come off on the side of being pro-Israel, then you're pro-Trump and vice versa, and so that has become implied within this topic. And within the Israeli side, which was also interesting itself, by many of our Israeli colleagues, there has been some reactions, similarly as it relates to the current sitting government regarding Benjamin Netanyahu. So there's also, how do you deal with these topics? And the reaction has been, across the board. We've seen much more critical ones, especially with our colleagues in Europe. But in North America, this has for sure become a heated debate about what is the kind of scholarship that's being put out there on these topics. I believe that we did and I think all of us who were involved in this project are extremely proud of what we did with the idea of putting out something that is a useful tool for individuals to see what is going in. These are phrases that we believe have a lot of weight, and in many ways, shapes, or form have hijacked the entire discussion on the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic without going into the weeds. All of us, who are social scientists, are looking to unpack the Middle East, the richness socially, religiously, politically, culturally, and what it does, the reactions have been similar, kind of putting it into a box and taking away from that diversity of opinions that needs to happen for the richness, for the advantage of all students and all academics to try to understand these topics and discuss them in an academic way. Unfortunately, that has not been the reaction, and I'm sure Donna in her presentation will talk about some of the love notes that she's received or reactions that she's received from colleagues and friends. And I know Cary will dive deeper into the larger issue of the scene itself as it relates to the anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic environment that you find within faculty that needs to be that he's obviously unpacked in great detail forensically in his book that you have here on the table. So without further ado, I'm going to let Cary talk first. And then we'll have Donna talk, and then hopefully we'll have time for a fruitful Q&A. So, thank you.
Thank you, Asaf. If you weren't here at the very beginning, the books over there are free. Take one for yourself, two for yourself, something for a friend. Don't make me carry them back to Illinois. So there they are. In her first-rate introduction to the word crimes issue, Donna emphasizes the effect that language, especially powerful key terms, can have on our perception and understanding both of the Jewish state itself and of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a whole. The effect of labeling Israel as an apartheid or settler colonial state combines rebranding, as she said, and renaming, sort of giving it a new name. In Donna's words, anti-Zionist vocabulary delivers up a Jewish state that is, by its very nature, violent and racist. These highly charged words are more than definitional. They're a kind of filter through which Israel's opponents see the world, a screen through which any evidence passes to acquire its meaning. And they're also mechanisms for outreach and political persuasion that help teach students and politicians alike how to see the world. Key terms also help empower slogans. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and turn their components into charged signifiers. Thus, part of what that slogan does is convince some that the very concept of freedom can only be applied to Palestine through the delegitimization of the Jewish state, that you can't think freedom other than through that kind of evacuation. Throughout the word crimes issue are scattered, concise observations, not only about the psychological and political power of the terms being discussed, but also about the general character of ideologically charged rhetoric, sort of lessons about how that rhetoric works that can be applied to other situations. The special issue, I think, empowers us to take this matter to the next level, which might be to think about the relational and differential effects of these key terms conceived as a differential field. We know from Saussure that key terms operate within a field of similarities and differences. And that's how they marshal their connotative effects, not contained within a single word, but contained in the process of building relationships. So we need to think about how apartheid, colonialism, human rights, occupation, pinkwashing, settlements, and other key terms intersect and function collaboratively. How do they work together with one another? So Ilan and Carol Troyen point out in their indigeneity essay that the project of adapting the term indigeneity to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has entailed conflating a critique of Zionism with the earlier quasi-legal term indigeneity, a term that was itself never definitively defined. There's no universal agreement on what that term means or refers to. So the result in the context of anti-Zionist politics is that the term invokes a belief that, quote, Palestinian Arabs are the sole long-time resident population with rights over the land, while Jews are but recent foreign conquerors. You hear indigeneity in the context of Palestine, that's the stuff that your brain fills with. Because indigeneity, so used, neatly defines Jews as invaders and the Jewish state as an intruding settler colonial society in the service of an imperialistic mission, all those other words become part of a connotative or associative field in which indigeneity is embedded. It's embedded in a whole set of terms that function to reinforce one another. The collection of terms is thus the baggage one word bears with it. Not that this short list includes all the baggage that's at issue. You can enter the network at any point, the network of terms, say with settler colonialism, rather than indigeneity, with similar results. Consider how many of the terms in the word crimes lexicon are part of the connotative field of indigeneity. Colonialism, occupation, apartheid, Holocaust, refugees, human rights, Zionism, Israel lobby, pinkwashing, settlements. Go right down the table of contents. Add some proper names, Jerusalem, Menachem Begin, Netanyahu, etc. All part of this connotative field that is mutually reinforcing. Part of the point is you don't need a present argument, thesis, or essay to get trapped in this associative nexus. You don't need an argument laid out for you. And that's not how it works for students who get co-opted into this discourse. All you need is the terms themselves empowered over time, brainwashed over time, and then reinvoked. The interrelationship between intersectionality, if you will, I'm trying to poison that word with every opportunity, treat these terms as reason to treat them together in one collection. It's really the intersectionality of this vocabulary that is the reason, I think, for putting them together in one book. Part of what's interesting, and I think so very destructive about this anti-Zionist discursive field, is that it is unstructured. There are other discursive fields for other topics, other issues that are structured, that have some prime term, some term that is the master term that controls all of the others. The anti-Zionist discursive field has no hierarchy, no definitive hierarchy. The terms are all interchangeable. Within the field, they all actually mean the same thing. None of the accusations they wield against Israel are worse than any of the others. If you believe Israel is a settler colonialist state, then you believe Palestinians alone are indigenous. Then you believe human rights are being violated, that all the settlements are criminal ventures, that the Israel lobby promotes colonialism, that Israel practices pinkwashing. You believe any of this stuff, you believe all of it, and it's all interchangeable. Now, the test case for that argument is the word crime addressed in Donna's introduction, genocide, which one may come to that term with some hesitance about its relevance. If you simply add that genocide to the terminological field, it's validated by all the other terms. So Genocide gets validated by pinkwashing, gets validated by settlements, gets validated by all the other terms, and you don't need to prove that genocide is actually taking place, which you couldn't do anyway. That's how it gets its certainty. The uneasiness about genocide's plausibility, it's an uneasiness reflected in modifications like slow genocide or attempted genocide. The other modifications that reflect that uneasiness is largely erased when it becomes part of a field of convictions. It's emptied of its genocide, is emptied of its immense historical meaning, and becomes just one more anti-Zionist complaint. And it normalizes bogus claims that enact Holocaust inversion. No conversation about these issues is really taking place, and there wasn't a lot of conversation about it in the criticism directed against the word crimes issues. No one was interested in, none of the critics interested in thinking through these complications. And we've instead been distracted by an assault on the editors and contributors. We thus have a twofold responsibility, I think, to account for the phenomenon of the organized opposition and to try to shift the conversation to a more responsible professional level, which is sort of the challenge throughout the world when the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is on the table. On my campus, I don't know how to do it, but I have a dream that it could be done short of the second coming. A number of us have detailed some of the political and institutional forces behind the recent controversy. I characterize it in part as a struggle for power over Israel studies as a field and over the Association for Israel Studies as an organization. It also reflected anxiety over changes in the field that are actually outside the control of AIS members. Among them, those who helped found it, what they thought could be an objective, apolitical area of academic study. Given that so much anti-Zionist scholarship, or what passes for scholarship from presses like California, Duke, or Chicago, is so ferociously partisan, and given how polarized public debate is over the conflict, I don't believe the field could indefinitely remain above the fray. You're not going to be able to keep Israel studies in a kind of apolitical, academicized realm. I'm not suggesting it should be ruthlessly politicized. I think it's admirable to seek neutral, objective, scholarly standards. But I think much that's said about Israel has political implications, and it's okay, even helpful, to address them if you are able to do so. Of course, political convictions can lead to basic confirmation bias in doing research, shaping arguments and reaching conclusions, and that needs to be confronted by both researchers and reviewers. As I argue in my book, Israel Denial, the echo chamber of peer review too often merely reinforces anti-Zionist convictions and is part of the confirmation bias, not actually part of an evaluation. At some level, nonetheless, because this is the third time I've tried to talk about this issue, I find the whole word crimes brouhaha completely incomprehensible. Take just two indicative pieces of evidence, the first minor, the second major. A number of people joined the chorus declaring the issue to be a violation of academic integrity because two of the papers lacked footnotes. It was pointed out that 6 of the previous essays lacked footnotes, not 2, but 6. And also that hadn't produced any complaints. No one seemed to worry about those 6 essays, let alone demands for anyone's head. But I didn't see any of the outraged critics responding to that little piece of information. What do you think about that? Silence. Like the Republicans in Congress, silence on the substance. It was then pointed out that the compositor had actually dropped one essay's notes. They weren't there, and the typeset copy was not shared with the editors, so they couldn't catch it. So actually it was one essay that lacked footnotes out of the 20. Again, this is pointed out to the critics, no response. That's fake news. They don't want to have anything to say about it. Meanwhile, I commented in print that concise position papers, which is what I think what some of these shorter ones are are often published without notes. I've published several of them without notes. I'm in collections of position papers that don't have that kind of apparatus. They're short position papers. Merely to sustain the rhythm of my remarks, I'll say again, of course, no response to that either. That's the minor criticism. The second piece of evidence, major, is that I've seen none of the special issue critics willing to engage in debates about the possible contributions any of the essays might have made to our understanding of the key terms the essays discussed. That would be the standard academic practice, as Asaf just mentioned. The academic outrage proceeded in a notably unacademic fashion. And that's part of what puzzles me. I just don't understand why that happened and why some people actually that I respect participated in that. So the attacks on word crimes were not a shining example of Enlightenment reason at its best. The attacks exhibited the familiar features of a moral panic. The sky was falling on Israel studies. Flee the cursed terrain of the special issue, or see your career in the field damned to perdition. Not the most Jewish of concepts, perdition, but I suppose there are only so many tropes available to support moral panics. When you're dealing with people in the grips of a moral panic, of course, they do not retreat to sweet reason when challenged. They double down, they get louder. The protest, therefore, was fundamentally irrational. It was collective madness, albeit of the sort to which academics are especially disposed. They plea for moral panic solidarity. They sign petitions. They demand apologies. They threaten legal action. They call for resignations. They resign from the journal editorial board themselves, then reverse course and offer to rejoin if they think the winds are changing direction. They revel in mob action. It was a mob action, and that's really not what academia is supposed to be about. The key distinction, perhaps, is that the critics don't claim the editors and contributors did bad or incompetent work. They want to stigmatize it as unprofessional. They don't want to have to prove the work is bad, because to do that, they would have to contend with the arguments people make, with the substance of the essays. Instead, they want to cast it out as rogue conduct. The case is merely a series of those accusations. The editors and contributors should apparently be abandoned on the campus of Birzeit University on the West Bank and left to see if they can safely hitchhike back, some appropriate punishment of that sort. Despite the ad hominem character of the attack, I have so far treated the protesters in what I've written before sternly but with dignity. I preferred to avoid concluding that they were, if you will, largely a basket of deplorables. The problem is that no explanation has freed me of my acute sense of incredulity, that these academics would themselves behave so unprofessionally. Worse still, they are not demonizing the anti-Zionist work that Norm Finkelstein publishes with California, that Sari McDeasy publishes with Chicago, or that Jasper Poor, bless her soul, publishes with Duke. Although that work is all fiercely, intolerantly, and maliciously political. These folks don't complain about that. Is that because it is extensively documented? Lots of footnotes? Even though the documentation is often either irrelevant or completely false. Of course, theirs is anti-Zionist, not Zionist work, to state that being no news at all. Of course, in Israel Denial, I contend that Stephen Salaita, Sari McDeasy, Jasper Poor, and others have themselves done irresponsible and unprofessional work, and I criticize them unreservedly for doing so, as fiercely as I know how, short of libel. But I only do that after spending tens of thousands of words exposing the dishonest character of their arguments and the astonishingly false character of their factual claims. So I contend with this substance at enough length to tire some readers, but that's what I do. I want all of the evidence that the arguments are incorrect put in its place. The Jasper Puart chapter is 30,000 words. Some books are 60,000 words. So it's a long piece of writing in which I try to take issue with all of the factual claims made. But to level such accusations without proving them, as the word crimes prosecutors do, would, for me, be unacceptable. I just wouldn't be willing to do it. Worse still, the word crimes accusations are almost entirely, therefore, without reference. They don't actually refer to anything that the authors do. They're a referent-free discourse. So you could just, this thing is rich with things that you can learn that you didn't know before. In his essay on settlements, Ari Bloff works to show that political disputes over West Bank settlements treat them exclusively as a post-1967 issue, whereas with Hebron, they implicate a much longer period of time. Bloff helps complicate the debate. By the way, he informs us that Google's repository of settlements worldwide, if you type in settlements to Google search engine, they only come up with Israeli settlements. Did you know that? I didn't know that. So there are a few things you can learn in the issue that I think you really didn't know before. I think the collection is rich with things I would guess many of us just didn't know. Jonathan Schanzer's objective entry on terrorism faults both Israeli and Palestinian authority and definitions, and does so with reference to distinctions between agitational and enforcement terrorism. It's as close to a politically neutral piece, I think, as you could ask. Leslie Clough's piece on Holocaust inversion is among the others that I find completely objective. I would challenge anyone to find substantive fault with Gerald Steinberg's essay on demonization funding, which again seems to me just a factual essay, right? He's done the work, there are the facts. You may not like it, but I don't see how the research can be faulted. In his entry on occupation, Ephraim Karsh works partly to recover a critical but often repressed historical fact. How many people are aware of this? That the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank began respectively with Egypt and Jordan occupying them for 19 years. That the process of repressing that fact is a word crime because it falsifies the historical reality and compromises what should be the full meaning of the word, right? Those were occupied territories for other countries for nearly 20 years, and lots of BDS members worldwide have no idea that that's the case, and they're probably not interested. Some of the essays have a distinct political perspective, and that's not surprising, since the collection is designed to interrogate and critique prevalent anti-Zionist definitions. Some contributors handle that task well, others don't handle it so well. No surprise, 20 academics writing about this stuff, you're going to like some of it, you're not going to like others. There are some people, if I were editing the issue, I would not have asked to contribute. I'm not fans of all of their previous work. So be it. I wasn't editing the issue, thank God. Escaped something there.
We can work on that for the next one.
But it's an important collection that should have started a fruitful discussion, not a defamatory campaign. Donna ends her introduction by declaring, quote, that the essay should return sanity to the discourse on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Well, there was faint hope of that then, less now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cary. Thank you for that extremely colorful and intensive dissection of the issue, which is very valuable. I will say also, by the way, just FYI, we are coming out with a follow-up to this, in the Middle East Quarterly as the reactions to this. So that will be coming out also in the next few months. I am really happy and honored to have Donna talk about her paper, which not only I think the reactions, Donna had the fortunate or unfortunate role of being not only the president but also the editor of the journal at the time when it came out, and many of the accusations went personally against her, to talk about, again, the personalizing the attacks rather than actually dealing with the topic at hand vis-a-vis the field itself. So I think that she has been through hell and back as far as trying to understand what's been going on in the field. So we're happy that she's here to share her views and the reactions and her observations now that she's been able to have a drink or two to recover from all of this.
I became president of the Association for Israel Studies in June of 2017 at a conference at Brandeis. I was an undergraduate at Brandeis, and thanks to my great colleague and classmate Ilan Tron, I was given the opportunity at Brandeis to assume the presidency. And for me, sometimes the best way to express feelings is through a canonical Jewish liturgy, and I wanted to say Ashrei. If you know, happy to be at the place that shaped my understanding of what the academy should be. I'm one of those Brandeis graduates who loved it because I spent most of my time in the library. And when I ended my term at Kinneret College in 2019, I was moved to say Baruch Shepitarani. That is to say, I was thankful that I got rid of some obligation. So it was challenging. And we're very pleased with the attention that word crimes triggered. It's unique and wonderful to find people reading what you write in whatever context on a certain level. But the reaction to word crimes by established members of the field of Israel studies, the kind of uproar that was unleashed really conferred a kind of legitimacy, a measure of legitimacy on a highly distorted discourse about the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And I want to devote the time for my remarks on the reaction and what I think was happening with established scholars in the field to discharge functions as gatekeepers. I think it was not simply a matter of really believing that this journal was what they said it was below standards and didn't fulfill all the criteria for an academic piece, but rather that they didn't want to engage the issues. Why didn't they want to engage the issues? Let me count the ways. So one thing to note right at the beginning is to draw your attention to the fact that condemnations of the volume began as soon as it was published online and before people had read it. And people were not unwilling to say, of course I haven't read it, but this special issue is the language, word crimes, is so filled with venom and hate and so unbalanced that it can't be good. But I'll get back to you when I read it. And to no one's surprise, when they read it, they said, yes, it confirmed their initial reactions. People focused on the term word crimes, arguing that we were criminalizing discourse and that we were stipulating a list of acceptable terms, when in fact we were interrogating terms. We were talking about how terms have really functioned not simply as gateways to uncovering new material, to looking at a history in a new way. And I'm drawn to revisionist scholarship. Like all academicians, we want to raise new questions about old material or find ways to look for a perspective that uncovers new material. There's nothing wrong with that. And I've done it in lots of work on women, on culture, in lots of different areas with regard to Middle East politics and Middle East history. So the notion now is that certain terms, if you can just use them, you don't really need you don't need proof, you don't need empirical information, you just use it. It's an oracle suggesting that even if Israel hasn't committed genocide, there's a tendency, if you're a settler colonial society, to genocide. Never mind that you can't look at the Palestinian population and find any evidence of this genocide, but it will come, inevitably. So this was the kind of inquiry and interrogation that was the motivation for the special issue. And I should say that a special issue, by definition, as Miriam's work that went sort of unrewarded and unrecognized. Let me recognize the hours she spent counting footnotes in all the special issues. But a special issue, by definition, in a journal is devoted to something different, is not going to be necessarily subjected to the same criteria, the same kinds of strictures that normal issues are shaped by. So the special issue was devoted to an argument. Now, because I was an editor of the special issue, and at the same time president of the Association for Israel Studies, the critics conflated my two roles. They said I would get phone calls from members of the Association for Israel Studies saying, well, as president of the association, you shouldn't have published this. Even though I did not identify myself as president of the association, I identified myself as an emeritus professor from Smith College, as I do with all of my academic publications. So that when they said I shouldn't have published this because of my role as president, I asked, how would I know after 40 plus years of publishing and books and articles and not triggering controversies, let alone triggering notice, how would I know that this would have triggered a controversy? And if you start to impose rules on officers of academic associations about what they can publish or when they can publish, how would you enforce that? What credible academic association imposes those kinds of impositions or imposes those kinds of rules on its leadership? So it was a very curious kind of reaction from established scholars whose work was not the subject of criticism in this volume. And let me give you one clear example. There's the early work of Gershon Shafir, 1989, on settler colonialism, where he looks at land settlement, land purchases by the first aliyah, or this sort of a capitalist model versus a socialist model, and tries to argue, or does argue, that the socialist model, which wanted only Hebrew labor, really accorded with a kind of settler colonial model of society. Now, he was wrong on a number of issues about settler colonialism, but there was data, there was an argument, there was something with which you could engage. There's nothing wrong with using the term settler colonial if you're using it in that way, or at least I don't think there's anything academically wrong, because you can take issue with it and you can look for its strengths and weaknesses. Now, if you look at the way in which settler colonialism is used by Dirk Moses or by people who support the boycott movement, Shira Robinson, no relation, you find that they're talking about a kind of construct without any evidence, and they don't. And the evidence that they try to argue exists, they claim is classified in archives, they can't get access to it. Again, they try to talk about what might be tendencies in Israeli society that haven't yet emerged. So this is a very different kind of term, the way it's used, to suggest that you can take an academic perspective and translate it into a moral cause. So that if right away, if you're talking about Israel, you have to use terms that assign it to the kind of area once reserved for brutal totalitarian regimes. Not at all the kind of society that Israel is, with its faults, with its problems. Shafir is interesting in another respect, because he was a person who, along with some others, ventilated the opposition to this volume and was deemed as the kind of appropriate person to edit a counter volume to word crimes. So, and to his credit, he wrote something in Fathom, an online journal, that at least stipulated in print what he thought was wrong with it, the volume. So he talked about the language, word crimes. It's criminalizing the use of terms. Now, what Shafir and others who argue that is that they had only one definition for crime. Crime could be mistake. The word is not interpreted, or the word doesn't have only one meaning. And I talk about the authority of Merriam-Webster, which was as a dictionary of American English, was established in what a recent volume from Princeton University Press calls Dictionary Wars. So you can use inflated language to have a kind of metaphorical meaning in other areas. So Shafir then goes on to say that you have to understand the uproar to word crimes is in the context of the move to the right and all of the illiberal measures that have been taken in Israeli society in the last decade or more. And some of the things he cites, like the attempt by Naftali Bennett when he was Minister of Education to impose an ethics requirement on faculty, AIS, under the presidency of Ilan Sharon, objected to, wrote a critique of. AIS, under when I was president, wrote on behalf of Laurel Qassem to have her enter the Hebrew University for a master's program. So it seems fair, at least, in a critique of how word crimes fits in with all these illiberal measures, to at least note that the people who were involved in word crimes critique those illiberal measures, and there's no material connection between what we published and what was happening because of voting in Israel or even voting in the United States. We have we have one vote in one country or another. The other person who, and the other phenomenon that came from this sort of gatekeeping function of people who hold very prestigious chairs in Israel studies came from one of the people in this area, Ari Dubnov, who holds a chair in Israel studies at George Washington University, who instantly rejected. He was about to receive a prize, the Young Scholar Award. That's a joint award given by the Association for Israel Studies as well as the Israel Institute. So he said he wouldn't accept it because there was some connection between the Association for Israel Studies and the journal Israel Studies, and having published in Israel Studies, he couldn't accept that. His rejection of that money complicated the relationship that AIS has not with the journal. It complicated the relationship the Association for Israel Studies has in one of our funding sources, which was not happy with the rejection. He not only rejected money via the Association for Israel Studies, but also the Israel Institute. Secondly, he said he wouldn't publish in Israel studies until it either withdrew or apologized for or made it clear that it was dissatisfied with this special issue. And he said that the special issue is without empirically based research, and also just a species of Israeli propaganda or hasbara, just speaking out for Israel because of the articles on the BDS movement, because of the section on the BDS movement. Now, this is very interesting. He then goes on to be quoted in articles in the Chronicle of Higher Education and in Haaretz as suggesting that because I was president of the association, and before me, Ilan Tron was president of the association, and now we're involved in this issue. He has to believe that this is an attempt to take over both the association and the journal. Someone who's criticizing an issue for lacking empirically based scientific information, taking too little factoids and suggesting a conspiracy is on shaky ground empirically. And what really annoyed me is he forgot that both Ilan and I probably ate on the kosher line at Brandeis University, which probably was the foundation of our conspiracy. However, leaving aside that, he's got a very interesting argument about the boycott movement. He suggests that you can't criticize the boycott movement unless you're working for the Israeli government. Now, I happen to believe that you can criticize the boycott movement on academic grounds, that in fact, a boycott of Israel denies particularly younger scholars who are not Israeli, who don't grow up with Hebrew. You're denying them the capacity to get the language skills that would give them the tools to gain access to archives or to gain access to do work in the academy. So that this is really an assault in a certain way on a certain segment of young scholars, and young scholars who don't have the privilege of being fluent in Hebrew. And I think it's important to note that of the many people who are sympathetic to the idea of boycotting and who are in Jewish studies or Israel studies, none of them would be hurt by the particular boycott. They're senior scholars. They're invited to Israel for all sorts of reasons. But it would hurt up-and-coming people. Moreover, there are many people who hold Israel studies chairs who have Israeli passports. They would never be boycotted because they can go into the country. They can propose boycotts. They would never be denied entry into the country because they can go on their Israeli passport. They don't have to go on an American or European passport. So this boycott issue is something that hurts a certain kind of scholar, and it's something, and I have opposed it on scholarly grounds, and it's I'm a student of Jay Hurwitz at Columbia. I was taught not to be political. I would go into my classroom on the Middle East conflict and admit that I was a life member of Hadassah only because my mother-in-law gave that to me as a wedding present. And I didn't think starting off my marriage by rejecting Hadassah membership was a good idea. However, I do try to be as neutral as possible in the classroom. I don't see myself as an advocate for Israel or as an advocate for any cause one way or the other. I think what I can do best is to try to get people to understand not what to think about the Middle East, but how to think about the Middle East, to give them insight into the intellectual tools that will allow them to make up their own minds. And I have students on all sides of the conflict. For 40 years, I probably taught more Muslim and Arab students than Jewish students at Smith. And I had classes with high enrollment. So I'm, very pleased with the way that was done. And I continue to do the same kind of thing. Interestingly, Ari Dubnov, whenever he sees something on BDS, seems to react in the same way. If you look at a review he did in the Israel Studies Review on a collection of essays by Colin Schindler, you'll find that while he praises Colin, sort of mixed praise for Colin Schindler as someone who you'd probably think of as not as old as Walter Lacour, but not as young as Derek Pensler. I find that very odd. But I come from a place that, produced words like ageism and, all kinds of sins that you weren't supposed to transgress. Nonetheless, when Colin evidently had some essays against the boycott movement, he describes Colin as just working for Israeli Hasbara. So that does seem to be his stock response. But on his Facebook page, he drummed up anger, drummed up all kinds of false accusations, which eventually made it into another online publication that interpreted what we were doing as part of racist patriarchy. I mean, it was just inevitable that that was going to happen by someone at NYU who does international something or other. And interestingly, he also was rather selective in his boycotting of the Association for Israel Studies, because he showed up at the 2019 conference because there was a panel devoted to his latest publication. So where he could get attention, he was willing to accommodate some of his principles. The point is, I think, that if you look at the decision, the letter that the people who resigned from the Intellectual Advisory Board of Israel Studies, insisting that it be made public. If you look at the two petitions that one of which went to the association, the other to the Israel Journal, worried about intellectual diversity, this uproar is something that a Freudian needs to analyze. I mean, all of the things that we were charged with is, by definition, what the people who were indicting us for this were themselves engaged in. They were in favor, in theory, of intellectual diversity, as long as it didn't include a critique of conventional discourse. They were in favor of intellectual diversity as long as the president of the Association of Israel Studies didn't publish something that contradicted their own views. They were in favor of intellectual diversity in theory, but in fact, when you talked about bringing them in, bringing Ari Dubnoff into the board of the Association for Israel Studies, he couldn't do it because it would compromise his scholarly credentials. There was something about this gatekeeping function that it seemed to me, like the paper that Cary just presented, was there was a definite reaction, an emotional reaction that said, we've got to show our colleagues on our campuses that we're part of an establishment that can live with the boycotters, we can live with a distorted, we'd rather live with a distorted discourse on the Israeli-Palestinian issue than have to confront our own colleagues and our own failings in talking about Israel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for both your papers and sharing what happened. I mean, clearly this is the orthodoxy of the day, and we can see how, to your last point, Donna, that, unless you're part of the orthodoxy, there, in order to live nicely with the BDS narrative, in order to fill the need that Israel Studies is open enough even to boycott it, which is kind of, killing yourself or sacrificing yourself in the name of the orthodoxy, is an anathema to the whole concept of actual discourse, which is what we're facing here and seeing today, and we've all been part of that. To that end, I think that all of us who've been involved in this project, Miriam was in the audience, I think are very proud of what we were able to do here. But I think it touched clearly a very a chord that needs to be exposed and going forward. And I think, to Donna's point in her paper, there is a larger question about the next generation of people who are going to go into Israel studies, Middle East studies, and the kind of information they're going to be willing to accept if they don't buy into this orthodoxy. And as you said, it's mostly affecting the younger generation, and that's the future of the field. And I think that's a bigger question that needs to be looked at.